Hey, good morning, everyone. Um, I was getting ready this morning and I was like, "God, I'm so tired." So as I put in the chat, I only got about 4.5 hours of sleep last night. And I was like, I can't believe we're going to talk about the importance of sleep on this morning. And I'm like, I'm so tired. I need to get some more. I need to get more sleep. Um, but some nights are definitely like that. Just for us, Wednesday nights are always really hard for me, because that's when we have share a little. We've got our family therapy for my daughter on Wednesday nights, and it goes until 9 o'clock. I mean, it's via Zoom, but so we're home. So as soon as it's over, like, you're home, you don't have to drive home, which is nice. But it goes until 9. And so then, like, I just can't, like, go straight to bed. I'm just not that type of person. I need time to unwind and, like, relax after all of that. So Wednesday nights are tough. And then this afternoon, we have, as a staff, we have, or this afternoon, evening, we have our staff holiday Zoom. In lieu of the in-person party. So I knew I wouldn't be able to get my workout in this evening. So I got up early to do it, because I'm a little bit obsessed with that. But as a result, I'm tired. So I'm not setting a good example for my family. And speaking of which, we literally, my husband got a call from my son's teacher. My son, I think I've mentioned, 1 week in person and 1 week at home. So he hybrid model, and even with the shutdown, because his school had started the hybrid model before the more recent lockdown, um, he is able to stay on it. Well, we have not been doing a good job as parents monitoring, like, is he on his iPad late at night? Because he obviously was, because he was so sleepy the other day that the teacher called my husband. And I picked Nathan up, and I'm like, that afternoon, I'm like, Nathan, like, why were you so sleepy today? They called Dad. He's like, yeah, I thought that was a little much for them to do that. Granted, my son's 11, and that's exactly what he said. He's like, I thought that was a little much. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then he told my husband, he's like, yeah, he has these, like, a study hall class in the middle of his day. He's like, they call it the smart period. He's like, in my smart period, I fell asleep. And, like, one of my friends woke me up, and my husband was like, how long did you sleep for? And he's like, probably about a half hour, but I was so refreshed afterwards. So that's in my household, what's been going on with sleep this week. Yvonne, how about you? I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
This is one of those imposter topics for me, where I'm like, I don't know why I'm speaking on it when I'm, like, the worst at it. And I don't know if any of you parents recognize this phone number. The phone number is 408-347-3800. And if you don't know what that is, it's our attendance line calling to say that my kid missed a class. And so I'm, like, scrolling through my past calls of, like, the last 2 weeks. Oh my God. I had like 8 of them, meaning that my child has actually missed like 8 classes in the last couple of weeks. I'm waiting for, one of the advisors, who's a good friend of mine, to call me and, like, call me out on the fact that my kid's having attendance issues. And it is all directly related to sleep. And we'll kind of break this up because, it's sleep for us, right? Like, how do we take care of our families if we're not rested? But then sleep for our kids. And one of the themes that I've been kind of coming across this week with myself, with parents, is, like, how much control do we really have when it comes to how much our kids sleep, when it comes to how much of their work they get done, when it comes to, just everything related to them. I find myself struggling with, sometimes we do everything. I can make my kid a glass of warm milk and turn the lights down and do all these things. And that's not a guarantee that he's going to go to bed. And I think for me, that's been the struggle of, like, how do we, enforce these types of things with sleep. And so I came across this study, and I thought it was really interesting because I always wonder, like, am I wasting my time, like, trying to get my kid to go to bed? Like, do I even have an influence over him? And I don't know what exactly the title of the study was, but it was basically, the idea is, what works better for kids and sleep? Is it a motivational style of support from the parents, meaning like, you really need to go to sleep, it's really, good for you, you're going to do better in school? That's the more the motivational, like, why sleep's important. And then we have like the regulatory, so like actually setting the rules and turning off the Wi-Fi and doing all these things. And the question of the study, the intent of the study was like, which of these works better? And does it matter if it's a weekday or a weekend? And so it was interesting because I was like, certain that the regulatory would be like across the board helpful for sleep, but it turns out that parents who enforce and like regulate screen time and things like that in like a kind of more forceful way, right? Turn off the Wi-Fi, take the phones away, that kind of thing. Their kids actually do sleep better. And the parents who are just kind of trying to monitor and let the kids kind of take control over it, they don't. But it's actually the reverse on the weekends, which I thought was really interesting. So basically the end of the study said, like, if you can regulate all those things consistently 7 days a week, those are the kids that are actually getting the most amount of sleep. And in writing, that's fabulous, right? Like, oh yeah, I'll just, regulate everything. But what happens when your kid has homework until late in the night? It's finals week, they're studying late. And, do I want to be the parent right now that, shuts down the Wi-Fi at 10 to make sure they get enough sleep? And not right now. Because I see him working all day long. And so I don't know that it's a matter of time management at this very week, or if it's like he needs more time this week. And I don't know if you've dealt with it. Is your daughter in finals week too right now? And it's like, my kid would flip if I turned off the Wi-Fi right now. And I've like peeked in his room. It's like midnight. He's actually doing stuff. And I don't know, I guess, what the right thing to do is in this situation.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually noticed my daughter this week, because it is finals week. And bless her little heart, she always pulls it off in the end. I'm straight crazy. She pulls it through. But I've noticed her this week, and I think because we've talked so much about the importance of sleep, she's actually consciously like trying to get more sleep this week and going to bed earlier so that she is refreshed for her finals and can like concentrate better. So it's been a little like, hey, maybe all of my harping on her is, she knows when it's important, so that's what she needs to do.
Yeah. And she's a senior, right? So it's taken a few years probably to establish that like knowledge and pattern, right? Like, my kid, maybe it's the whole boy versus girl thing, but he's not quite there yet.
And maybe it is because, and it's maturity, and because was it last year, this time, it might have been around this time, this like finals week in December last year, because I don't think it was 2 years ago. So I'm friends on Instagram with her friends. And so her best friend posted a video of my daughter that my daughter had shared with her, like dancing around our house at like 4 a.m. during finals week, because she was pulling an all-nighter to study. And I was like, Hannah, what are you doing?
It's funny. It's like people talk about sleep like almost like it's a badge of honor. Like it's almost like bragging rights to say like, oh, I get 3 hours, or, I don't need that much sleep, or I'm going to pull an all-nighter tonight. Like there's some like sense of like almost like pride in it. Like I ask students all the time, like, how much sleep do you get? And it's like, oh, 3 hours. And I'm like horrified. And they're like patting themselves on the back. Like, that's all I need. I'm like superhuman.
I remember when I was in college, and I believe it was my freshman year of college, and probably like the end of the first semester, where I pulled an all-nighter to study for finals. because I thought that's what you were supposed to do, because everybody talked about pulling all-nighters. And so I did. I stayed up all night. I did terrible on that final. I was so tired. My brain was not working. And I think that was just to me like, no, that doesn't work for me. I can't.
But even as like an adult, like it's like, because I, everyone that knows me knows that I'm like a night owl. Like I do my case notes from 11 to 1, sometimes 2, and then I need time to like wind down. And it's just kind of my pattern. But I've noticed even for me, it's like, oh yeah, that's how I work or whatever. But then it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm sitting in a meeting. Like I was sitting in the IEP at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon last week, and I literally had to shut my camera off because I could not keep my eyes open. And I'm like, okay, that's not really something that I need bragging rights over. Like I should be like embarrassed, right? Like I could not hold it together. And, I know for me over the years, it's like, I am nothing without sleep. Like I am useless. I'm unmotivated. I'm cranky. I'm, all these things. And, it really did take me 42 years to figure out like, hey, this is important. This is how I function. And how do we instill that in our kids? And can we even instill it in our kids? Or is it something where you just have to learn hard lessons? We talk about like the gift of failure, and, sometimes they might have to sleep through a test, or whatever it is. It's like, so it's that balance of like, how much are we intervening? I talked about the like regulatory stuff. Like, does that mean that I shut off his Wi-Fi and like let it play out? Or does that mean I'm up, 20 minutes before their class, dragging them out of bed? Like I think it depends on each kid, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know that there's like a concrete answer for that. Like, I'm not sure what the right thing to do is. Could I have shut his Wi-Fi off last night? Yeah. Was he probably playing video games most of the time he was up? Probably. But I don't know that it's the right time to like force that lesson, I guess.
I don't think having that conversation at like 11 o'clock or midnight and like shutting, like that just seems like so counterproductive. Like, have that when you're like calmer and it's like during the day. And that's actually why when Yvonne and I were talking about our topics for the year for these Zooms, we actually purposely scheduled this one for this day, knowing that it's the day before we're about to have 2 weeks off. And so I think, like we were saying, because this is finals and your kids are probably, actually really super tired right now because they probably have been staying up later, doing school and getting all that stuff in. I would say like, okay, like today's the last day of school. They don't have classes tomorrow. Give it through this weekend, let them catch up on sleep a little bit, even though experts always say that you can't really catch up on sleep. I mean, I think we all know, like you kind of can. I mean,
Feels good at least.
Don't give them 2 weeks to catch up on sleep, but give them, I would say, through this weekend, right? And then starting on Monday, that's when you have a conversation with them about sleep schedules and like what is the amount of sleep that they actually need. I mean, teenagers need 10, 11 hours of sleep. And, nap times don't count. So, and really talking to them about, okay, what time do you have to get up in the morning? And then what, counting backwards, what time do you need to go to bed? And like really encouraging them and, using this 2 weeks to try to get them in that habit. So that
I think if you are going to set those like regulations about like screen time and stuff, like this is the perfect time, right? And I know I give my kids like extra time on video games or whatever during the breaks, or they can sleep in or whatever. But going back to school for me, I'm thinking like, I think it's important that their Wi-Fi is shut off by 10:30, 11, like that. Cause even for me, it's important. And if I can tell them ahead of time before we're in like crunch time finals week, like, hey, it shuts off at 11. So whatever you do between the time you wake up until then is on you, right? Is up to you, but I have to like do this. And that would actually take time to do it. Obviously now is not the time to set that in motion. But I think, if I knew I had a certain amount of time, and, we talk about like stress and like good stress and bad stress, and having time constraints can be good stress. Like, okay, they know they have to work if this is going to happen, but, you know, we have to be prepared for the fight, prepared for the tantrum, if that is good, if that is what you decide to do for your family. And, I'm going to talk a little bit about, and these things are things we already know, but sometimes just having like the data is important. But like, why is it so important? Why is sleep so important? And it really is like covering every aspect of ourselves and our teenagers, of what sleep does for us and how it benefits us. It's I hear different numbers, between 8 and 11 hours of sleep is what I've heard for teenagers, and all kids are different. But I think generally speaking, like 8 to 11 hours. And, that would require my kid to go to bed at what time? Like, to get up on time. Like, he would have to be in bed by like 10, and that's never, ever going to happen. Thanks. So the first one is just like your thinking patterns, like your ability to process, like when you're tired, right? Like, how do you have the ability to be like a deep, expansive thinker if you're tired? And the answer is no. Like, and so when we talk about all-nighters, it's like, you might be up doing the work, but is it your best work? Are you going to be at your best? And how is your memory? And sleep is so important. And I tell students all the time, like, if you don't sleep, like, you're literally like good for nothing. And I know it feels like you're getting stuff done, but what is the quality of your work? And is it worth it? And I think the answer for the most part is no. The one that I, focus on is emotional health and what sleep does for your emotional health. And, as a social worker and like a therapist, like, I have so many students that I work with that are just in really bad mental health and don't sleep at all. And sometimes the interventions include, like medication and therapy. But I tell people all the time, like, there is nothing more important than sleep. And I don't care if you go to the top psychiatrist and the top therapist in the country, if you're not getting your sleep, all of that is really in vain, because your brain is not, prepared to take in the strategies that you need to do. And, I would say that there's definitely a relationship between, depression and sleep. Sometimes we have students who are depressed and they sleep too much, but they still wake up tired. Or, my anxious kids, they can't fall asleep. Like, their minds are racing, and, sleep is so vital. But what happens when you have a kiddo who's so anxious that they can't sleep? Like, how do we address that? And, how do we, make them change their sleep patterns when that's just not the priority for them right now, when they're just not well? And so, I just can't speak enough about like how important it is for kids, especially who are struggling emotionally. And, prolonged sleep loss negatively affects emotional development. There's a lot more interpersonal conflict, mental health problems, relationship issues. I don't know if, your kids, when they're tired, are irritable. Mine are. I am. Even this morning when I woke up, my husband's like, somebody woke up on the wrong side of the bed. And I'm like, I slept 7 hours, but then I thought about it. I was like, well, yesterday I slept about 3.5 hours. And the day before that, probably 3 or 4 hours. So it's like, okay, this is, my initial reaction was to snap back. But then I thought about it. I'm like, no, that's actually true. And I like that, Jenny asked, like, how many hours did you get? Because modeling that is so important. I have my kids always say, like, why do I have to go to bed? You're just starting your program right now, and I know that you're going to watch 3 episodes or whatever. And for me, as a parent, it's like my quiet time, right? My late nights are the time when I feel like I'm at my best to get my work done, or I feel like I just need to decompress. And I think you said it, Jenny, like I can't just go straight to sleep after therapy. I got all these things on my mind. And so we need to kind of scale back our preparation for sleep. Like if I know I need to be in bed by 11, I literally need to start my sleep hygiene routines by 8. And at 8 o'clock, I'm like, we're probably just finishing dinner and I'm doing the dishes and they're watching TV and all these things. And it's like our lifestyle is not really set up to have a good night of sleep. I thought you were going to say something.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that, the sleep hygiene and having those routines, and maybe those, like, right, I was saying, be talking to your kids, like, use these 2 weeks. That's actually a great place to start. I mean, talk about how much sleep, but then, like, what is their sleep hygiene? Like, what do they need to do to get themselves ready for sleep? And another thing that you mentioned, with kids with anxiety, and I was listening to, I think it was this morning. I think it was I think it was this morning. I was listening to a podcast and they were doing an ad for Headspace. I don't know, the app, where they've got meditations and stuff like that. And they have, like, there are, and it's not just that one, there's actually a ton of resources out there right now for meditations for, like, getting your mind ready for sleep. And so I think kids with, like, that are really anxious, and it's hard for them to settle down, encouraging them to listen to that. I've noticed my son will do that. He will turn on, and, like, we've come into his room in the morning and, like, there's this sound of rain. You're like, what is that? And he has, like, turned that on to soothe himself. So, like, talking to your kids and introducing them to things like that that can help them, relax their mind. There's nothing wrong with that. I think sometimes we think that, like, oh, you should just be able to fall asleep. Well, that actually can be really difficult for some people.
Well, you just reminded me because I don't know if I've shared this before, but one of my sons had like debilitating anxiety for a year. Like did not go to school for a whole year. We had to put him in a special program, this whole thing. And during those few years of treatment for him, it was our routine every night. I would go into his room, I would turn on the diffuser with the lavender, I would dim the lights. We would lay down together and we would do a sleep meditation. And it was so powerful for me. Like half of the time I would wake up like still in his bed the next day. Like I was just out. And, when you mention that right now, I'm like, I was doing that because he was in crisis. But what I should be doing is doing that to avoid crisis, and I always use the analogy with students about the car is like, if you have a car, like what do you have to do to maintain it so that it keeps going? You put gas and change oil and, get it clean and get it serviced and all these things so that it keeps functioning. And if you only serviced your car after it caught on fire or broke down, you wouldn't really have that much you'd have a shell of a car. And that's the same with us. And I usually use that analogy in regards to therapy, but it's in regards to just self-care and sleep and, healthy patterns and habits and things like that. And so this is something that I should still be doing. And they actually, even my older one would come in and join us because he just loved that time and that ability to like force yourself to decompress and relax. But now I'm like, oh gosh, that's something I should be doing all the time. But our bedtime routines are rushed. It's usually me, I'm finishing up the dishes and I'm like, go to bed. And it's like, that's not really conducive to sleep if your mom's like yelling at you and you're, having this argument. Like if I have an argument, then I'm going to need an extra hour to like decompress. And so if I'm yelling at my kids to go to bed, which, makes sense because there's frustrations and things like that I know we've all dealt with, but is that really going to solve the problem? No. And then I need an extra, few hours to just like stop being upset about it. And it's like, these are things that we could teach them to do. These are things that we can show them that we can do. And it's not just something that you do when you're, not well. It is something to do to keep you healthy. We don't really talk about like risky, I guess for me, like risky behavior and, drunk driving and things like that are things I haven't actually thought about a whole lot this year. most of our kids are not going anywhere. And so when I think of like risky behavior now, I think of more things having to do with like social media and online. But really, it's like when you're sleep deprived, there is decision making issues and increased risky behavior. And, maybe again, it doesn't really pertain to everybody right now while we're in quarantine, but, things aren't going to be like this forever. And I don't know who has drivers and who doesn't. My son is in the beginning stages of driving. The thought of him behind the wheel tired is frightening, and making sure that I'm really pushing that sleep for safety reasons, like they always say, like drunk driving and sleepy driving is, very comparable. And it was like 55% of like behind the wheel accidents that involve falling asleep are people underneath the age of 22. And so it's like tired kids, probably college students who aren't getting enough rest. So making sure that we're prioritizing sleep because of safety issues. The next part is the hardest one, and electronic devices. And when you really get into the science of sleeping and how light impacts your brain in the sleep patterns and things like that, it is literally like having the sun in your face all day long. They're at the computer, and what we're supposed to do is when we wake up in the morning, we open our blinds, we let the sun come in, and as the course of the day goes and we get less and less sun, then we get the melatonin built up in our body and we're able to fall asleep at night. But imagine if you had blaring sun in your face all day long, how do you sleep? And that's something that we don't really have a lot of control over because they're in front of the computer all day long. I know my kids online at least 10 to 12 hours a day. And so, when it comes to like his brain, it's like, I don't really have a whole lot of control over that. So how do we monitor that? And how do we regulate how much time and how late until the day they're going?
Something that's really hard right now. And, and maybe even I'm thinking about this right now, kids are so stressed right now with like the amount of work. And I'm imagining that this is actually contributing to it. Like this, what you're just saying about the light and being in front of the screen, because they're in front of the school, right? All day. And then they've got work, homework and stuff that they have to do on top of that. Um, it is really, that is really difficult. One thing I would say about that though, in all of my conversations with teachers about the amount of work they're assigning, one thing that seems to be a really common refrain with the teachers is I think a lot of times it's actually classwork that's being assigned. And they're like, hey, you can do this during class, and or you can finish it for homework. And the kids, like, because they're teenagers, they're going to be like, oh, I'll just do it later. And they're not using that class time to actually get that work done. I honestly feel like probably 75% of the time, that's what's happening, where they could have done it during class. They could have gotten it finished, but then they're not. And so just like a little like aside to parents, that if you, especially as we start second semester, obviously like this semester's ending today, and when we get into second semester, like if you're seeing your kid with a lot of homework, ask them what's happening during class time, and did they have time to work on that during class, and to take advantage of that time, so that then hopefully they're not having to be on the computer even more later on, and then they can have that time away from the computer.
I have students who've been sharing screenshots to me of the amount of work they have in their classes. And so it's just one, I'm like, that is just like an absurd amount of work. It was like 15 things. And I was like, no, it just doesn't feel right. And so sure enough, I look into it further. And I think it was like 80% of it was classwork. And so I'm like, at first, like feeling bad for them, like, oh, kind of buying into the like, oh, the teachers are just giving too much work. But it's like, what are you doing with your time when you're there? Like, I know that it's difficult when you have tabs that you can, click on in the middle of class. And are you really getting stuff done? Or maybe they're so sleep deprived, they're probably asleep during class. But it's like so much of that is classwork. And, I'm like, now I just don't take it at face value. I'm not buying that you have like 15 homework assignments in one day. but it's like you have a long class period and you have all these little assignments that, build up over the course of the week that you're missing. And that's, something that you have to learn how to manage your time. And time is such a huge, I thought you were saying something. Good.
Because I think a lot of times teachers are trying to be flexible and like, kind of like, hey, okay, guys, if you didn't get this done, you can still turn it in. But then kids are saying, well, oh, I can do it later. And, and so I think from the teacher's perspective, like, and, it's one of the things that we've talked about, like, just tell them that they have to have it in by the end of class, and then you have that option.
Free up their evenings, but there's so many things that have to be done during the day. And I think we get kind of caught up in like, oh, I'm home all day, so it's fine, I have more time to do things. And really it's like, I don't know about you, Jenny, but for me, like the time pressure of being home feels so much more intense right now because I've got all these schedules to manage in the house. Like I have to feed them at a certain time. I've got work things going on. There's additional obligations that people have because we're in quarantine. A lot of our teenagers are taking care of younger siblings. Like there's so many pressures.
I mean, I think it definitely is hard and it's been an adjustment. Though, I mean, I feel like, we're 9 months into this. I feel like I've actually adjusted to it. I've got my routine like on days that I'm home. But one question I had for you and for, we don't have that many parents with us today, but I've noticed with a pandemic and working from home, I work from home 3 days a week. I'm at school 3 days a week. My kids are obviously, at home. Well, my son does go to school a week at a time. I've noticed I get more sleep now. Like and I think for me, I mean, it's just the practicality of, because I live, 30, 40 minutes away from work, you take that hour to an hour and a half of commute time out of my day. Like I don't have that anymore. Like that's time that I have made, like I can use for other stuff. And I do find myself like on days, this morning, like on Thursdays and Fridays, I'm at school. So I had to drive in today. So I did get up earlier. But like yesterday, like I got up at like, I don't know, like 7:20. And so that like in a normal like school year, I would never be able to get up that late. But when I just have to like roll out of bed, throw my hair up, I'm in sweatpants or me in my pajamas, like I'll throw a nice sweater on. So from up here, I look good, put on some earrings and slap on some mascara, I'm good. And so like that, I feel like this in the past 9 months, I've gotten more sleep because of that.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely true. I mean, the commute one for me, like I'll be in a webinar and, that's when I don't have the camera on and I'll be, I'll be folding laundry. And, those are things that I'm not able to do when I'm at work. And another thing where I feel like I'm really saving time is when I'm at work, I love my coworkers. I love most everyone. And I love to talk and people always want to come in and ask questions. And I'm so behind because, chit chatting or whatever's going on. So it's like, I have more of that time, but like, I also feel like right now, maybe I'm not a good like manager of my time because I'm like, why is the day going by so fast? And I feel like I didn't get enough done and all these things. And it's like, we're in like the perfect opportunity to really establish those good patterns and, boundaries of work time versus home time. And I think with our kids, it's like, we haven't even really considered the like social things that they're not doing anymore. So there is time, but it's like, how are they managing it and how pressured are they feeling? But I hear students all the time say like, I don't think that my teachers know that, I still have things that I have to do. And I do understand that, but it's true. It's, maybe there needs to be more regulation of like, yeah, turn in your assignment at the end of the class period so that you're not carrying this with you. Like maybe that's the way I can help you.
I'm also curious, and I'm putting this out to the parents, you'd run your parents to school too, but, and then people that might be listening to this later to go ahead and email me. Cause I am curious about the change in the start time for school. Because, with the distance learning schedule, school starts at 8:30, and it, goes later. With the block schedule, some kids, if they don't have a first period, they're even starting later. And has that been a good thing? Have parents like seen the difference that. And I'm really curious because there is a law that's going to be, California has changed the school start time that's going to take an effect in a couple of years. And so it's one of the things that, like, in my role as principal, that I'm actually starting to look at, and consider, is the bell schedule for next year, assuming that we're back in person, and what bell schedule are we using. And so I'm curious about, the theory is, because knowing teenagers, teenagers tend to get up in the morning at the last possible second to get themselves to school, right? They're not going to get up early and like do other stuff. And so if you start school later, then the theory is that they're going to get an extra hour or so of sleep. So I'm curious if anybody, you can put it in the chat if you want to, or if anybody has any thoughts on that.
I would say for my son, because of distance learning, not needing to, be in front of anyone. So there's a lot of those activities that typically are the regular grooming and time to reach the school. Most of the times he's rolling out of bed, sitting in front. So, during this time, I think that um, the kids have become very relaxed. So I'm not sure if it touches on your late start or early start, but it makes it difficult. Whether late or early start, I think just distance learning makes it difficult to maintain those daily routine of maintaining yourself. I think for teenagers, they don't care too much.
That's a really good point, and something that I think, is looking forward. I mean, I think with the vaccine and everything, I mean, we're in a really bad period right now with the pandemic, but I think we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, like kind of starting to see like, okay, this is going to end. Like, especially, I mean, like we have every I mean, we're going to be in distance learning for the remainder of the school year, though there is talk that maybe at the very end of the school year, we're able to do something more in person. But, certainly next school year, I'm very confident that we'll be back in person. And that, that is a really this is going to be an adjustment for our kids on having to do that, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I will wake my daughter up and I'll be like, Hannah, her school actually starts at 8:45, so it's actually a little bit later than us. I'm like, school starts in 30 seconds, and she will literally, she has her laptop in bed next to her. She will literally roll over, turn it on, she doesn't even sit up.
It's gonna be really difficult next year. For me even, it's I got the sweatpants thing going on, and I get up at 7:30, which would be unheard of during the regular school year, and I slightly dread it. I mean, obviously I'm so excited to go back, but those parts, it's man, I'm starting to see some silver linings of okay, that extra rest this year has been a bit of a gift. I know stuff has been really tough, but even for the kids of I have one that's totally ready to go back, and then one that's just why can't we do this forever? Why are they rushing the vaccine? I'm no, that's not how we think. We need to be healthy, but it is going to be a struggle. But I'm glad I don't have a daughter that puts makeup on, because that would just set us back way more time.
I have a question. I think the social interaction has, of course, missed out for a lot of kids. And there are some kids that comes easier, where, pretty resilient between, they've been active, they've engaged with their teammates or such. But there's, I would say, a large, amount of kids that weren't that active.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, and I may have missed, I apologize if I have, but has there been any scheduled rally of some sort, or, reaching out to students, allowing maybe, to be kind of somewhat of a mandatory for them to just be present and just to hear, even if they don't engage, but to hear other students, how they are dealing with this, or what resource, what they're doing, or even from the counseling office, um, you know, just some type of activity that say, hey, how you doing? How are you doing? What suggestions to kind of cope through this?
Yeah, ASB has done some things with, I mean, it's been virtual, and some clubs have done some things. Again, it's all virtual. So, what we're finding with the kids is, sometimes they're into that, and sometimes they're not. The counselors, they've actually been impressed when they've done presentations where they like bring in like all of the juniors or all the sophomores. Um, they've been impressed with the amount of kids that are showing up and participating in those things. But yeah, it's hard. I don't know, Yvonne, if you have.
No, so what I'm finding is it's really, really difficult to engage my students online. And so, I've had a few throughout the year of like drop-in lunch sessions where it's like kind of like a COVID vent session. And, some weeks I've had 35 kids and some weeks I've had like 4 kids. And I don't know, like one of the things I've been learning is like, I don't know if it's the advertising or if it's just their lack of time, but I find it a real struggle to get consistent participation in counseling, in groups, in drop-in sessions. The first one I did actually was really good, and people were, it was nice for them to share their struggles with, quarantine and, seeing that other kids are in the same boat. And then it was just like, my attendance just totally dropped off. And, I've been like racking my brain all year of like, how do I get these kids to engage with me? And I think I shared before, it's like the most success I've had this year was via text. And so I have a system where I'll text kids in the morning, just like words of encouragement or whatever. And my list has grown to like 80 text messages. I'm texting 80 kids a day, like to check in and see how they're doing. And I wonder, like, is that just the medium that they prefer right now of not like having long conversations? I don't know. That's kind of what I've found. I think as we think about going back into school, and that's definitely something that I've got on my mind of like, how do we re-engage these kiddos? Because quite frankly, a lot of the students excel academically and there's a lot of social deficit, as far as like interacting with peers. And it's like, now we're a year behind on building those
Right.
skills and really needing to catch up next year on like giving them opportunity to talk, to meet people, to engage. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, because it's definitely something that we need to provide opportunities for them to have that social interaction. And it's
Right.
easier for some kids than others.
I
Yeah.
think from my perspective as principal, especially when we look into the spring semester, obviously January and February, I predict that we're still going to be in place and lockdown type scenario until more and more people get the vaccination. And then, hopefully things can let up. And, we're looking at hopefully by April, May, we're actually able to do more in person. And so our classes and the academics, I can actually see, like, I'm like, we'll stay on distance learning with that. And that would be my recommendation to the district. The teachers' classes, like they've got this now. Like, we've been doing this for a semester, we've got it. Yes, in person's better, but they've got routines. My emphasis would be, doing more club activities on campus, maybe like some rallies. We, have to do like 4 different rallies because I don't predict anytime soon that we're bringing 2,000 kids into a gym.
Right.
So, but like doing like, and that's where, when we get towards later spring, the end of the school year, that's where, where the social aspect and putting more of an emphasis on that and bringing that back in.
Yeah. And I know this has impacted some students more than others. We have some kids who are super social, and I've seen them struggle immensely this semester. Then I have my kid in my room who's like, thank God I don't have to go to prom, or no one's going to ask me to prom, and like all these things. He doesn't care. He's like, I don't care about graduation. I don't care about rallies. Like they stink anyway, or whatever. And that's his scenario. But I know that there are students who just thrive on being around other people. And this has just been a real blow to them, because they're not having that energy of other people, and really learning to be alone can be really heavy for some of them. And so I like that idea of focusing on the social aspect in the spring. If like we can get them together, like I can't tell you how much I would love to have a group of teenagers like out on the grass doing something, and just having them together. And like, I can't wait. Like I literally,
Yeah.
Even if it means I have to get out of bed early, I just can't wait to have that, because it's so important for them. And like I said, that's always my biggest worry, is that they're going to just thrive in their academics, and then job interview comes and don't have the ability to communicate effectively. And that is my huge worry all the time with teenagers. And, having opportunity to support them in that area, and just to feel good and be out is something that I'm like, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I believe, during this stage, they are socially thriving, if there are opportunities, and also physically, they're a ball of fire, and they need to get that out. And I think, PE is so important. If they are, if it's not an obligation, some kids will not exert that energy that is locked up in them, and feel that. And yeah, I have to say that PE, from what I've seen, is really by choice. And I don't think that it's so good for the kids. But, you can only push certain areas so much.
Yeah. Exercise is, well, I mean, it's become my pandemic obsession, not even gonna lie. Totally has become my obsession. And my husband is sharing it, and so he and we were exercising a lot, but my two kids look at my husband and I like, well, you're crazy. You're just, and my daughter she's a high school athlete, but since sports shut down, I mean, she was somebody that was working hours a day. And in the last 9 months, maybe she's walked around the block a couple times. Like she just.
Do you feel like it has had a negative effect on her some way? I mean, has changed her? Maybe what, if you could share, how that adjustment has changed her, that you've noticed.
I definitely think it has. I mean, she is somebody that, was going through kind of her peak suffering from depression, anxiety, right when the pandemic, and it was really bad for us. Spring, it was a bad time in our family. Really, really difficult. And so as a parent, I've been really, like listening to her and what she's saying she's needing, and not pushing what I think she should be doing, and having that balance, which is always really hard, because yes, I would, I know she'd get exercise, but so, I'm like playing the game of like earlier this week, she was like, I think I'm going to go on a walk, and I'm like having to play it cool. Like, oh, okay.
Right.
But like, I'm like playing it cool. Like, oh, okay, go on a walk. Sure. Whatever you need to do.
It's true, because like my son is a baseball player, and he's heartbroken that there's probably not gonna be baseball this year. And he used to be conditioning and running and all these things. This kid, I swear, like his muscles have like atrophied. Like he's just like I had him helping me lift something the other day. I'm like, what happened?
Gumby now.
Where are you? But I started this thing this week, and it's so dumb, but it was more for me, because like, Ginny's like kicking butt on her Peloton, and I'm like going on a couple mile rides here and there. And so what I did, this is so stupid, I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you, is I took my coffee money because I've like set aside a budget for my Starbucks coffee every week, which is actually a big budget, which is bad, but and I took it out in cash and I put it in a jar. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm telling my boys, whoever gets up and drags mom on a walk takes $4 out of the jar. And so this started on Saturday. I know it's bad. It's like my own personal trainer. I figured I'm paying for it. That's the most they've gone outside this whole pandemic. And
They have to join you, right? They have to join
drag me. And it's been hilarious because it's like, I know I'm like desperate at this point. Ginny's laughing.
My husband and I literally had a conversation over the weekend when we were talking about Christmas gifts for our son. And, you know, like I got him his Legos and stuff, but I was like, we're going to get him a gift card. And I'm like, should we get him an Amazon gift card or a Target gift card? And my husband's like, get him a Target gift card. At least he'll get out of the house.
Totally. My kids are pale. I keep bringing up I don't know if you ever remember the movie back in the 80s, The Flowers in the Attic. Did you ever see that? The kids are essentially like locked in the house for years and they're super pale. And you remember that movie? And I keep thinking that I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my family right now. And we talk about the importance of like sun and vitamin D and the whole thing. And it's like, I literally live walking distance to Ellen Rock Park, which has beautiful trails. I've lived here for 3 years. And last week was the 3rd time I went. And it's like, there's no excuse. And it's like, chances are if I go, they're going to want to go too. And so really trying to set that example of like getting out. And I mean, for me right now, I had to include some dollar bills, but it's working. So whatever we have to do to get them up and moving. And then when they're tired, it's like, how do you go to sleep if you've like done nothing all day, right? Like physically, you're not tired. So my hope is that getting them out and doing things is they might actually be a little bit tired in the evening and actually go to sleep.
Yeah. So we're coming up on the end of our time. So I guess I want to end with saying like, I really want to encourage, and I'm saying this to myself too. So don't think I'm just telling parents to do this. I'm just telling like myself, no, this is what we need to do, is use this 2 weeks off to reset some, you know, we talked about resetting, but like reset, you know, some good habits, you know, whether it's sleep or getting out and, you know, like we were just talking about getting some exercise and, you know, really, you know, this, like when you have a chunk of time like this, that is like vacation time, especially right now where like nobody's traveling. And so you're actually going to be home. This is actually really a perfect time to do something like this and to set some good, you know, our topic, sleep habits, but just any type of habits.
You know, Jenny, I found this. I don't know if it's on the website or not, but it actually was in one of your folders. And it's basically tips on how to get enough sleep. And it has a whole list of like, you know, making sure like sleep hygiene and starting your routine 2 hours before bed and make sure you're not doing like a lot of like energetic movement and light and just all these different tips, avoiding stimulating activity. I love that it says get a foot rub. I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to get one of those, but it would be helpful. But just, you know, dimming the lights and, you know, making sure that your kids aren't like overstimulated before bed. And so I'm not sure if that's on there, but it's in the drive.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. I hope that you have a wonderful 2 weeks off and enjoy the holidays. I did say in the email that come February, Yvonne and I were going to be trying something different with these Zooms. And we're going to do a book chat where we're going to read a book called The Gift of Failure. I linked it in my email, but I'll keep linking it in my email. So in case you missed it. But I hope that everybody joins us in that. I'm super excited about it. I've never led a book talk, so it'll be fun.
I don't think I've ever gone to one.
But it will be fun. But thank you, everybody.
Yeah, hang in there this week, everybody. I know it's a tough one.
Happy holidays, everyone. Take care.
Cool.